everyone. It is Friday Night Live, and we are in for a special treat. We have Dr. Richard Allen Miller returning. Hold on second here. So I got some new headgear, and I heard myself coming and going. Rick, how are you doing, my friend? I was meeting myself coming and going. I'm going, well, where did that go?
That's the Mad Hatter. No time to say hello, goodbye.
Yeah,
I'm late.
Well, actually, I had wrote here a couple of things I wanted for you and I to just kind of talk about and just chat. And one of them was planes of existence. And, I was thinking right before I came on, I was talking to my wife and I said, I often wonder, the next plane is going to be in the spirit realm. It will be at some plane of existence. And I guess my thought was, is the space-time continuum, is it continued in the next plane, or are those laws suspended?
I have no idea how to respond to that one. Time's not real. It's an illusion, and we have been trained from birth to somehow think that there's a past, the moment, and the future. And it's the way we perceive with our senses and organize the information. And it's all of it right now. That's one of the reasons why a lot of American Indian and other Aborigines, different, more what we would call primitive tribes, would actually think that consciousness holds less actual real content than certain kinds of dream states, like lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming, when you're daydreaming, when you're just kind of letting your mind wander, that's a more accurate, closer picture of reality than where you are right now. And the next movement today is in medicine, for example, will be about spiritual healing. Before they even start to talk about your physical elements, they'll talk about your spiritual needs for healing. And cancer as an example. And I'm going to go as far as to suggest that placebo is 70% of all healing, not 10. That means you probably, if you can listen to yourself, know more about what's going on inside yourself than any doctor, any psychologist or shrink. You really know what's going on. You just don't want to be honest with yourself. And so you come from a place of wounding rather than get over it and somehow see what terrible thing that happened to you is a blessing, because those distinctions are what separate you from me. This is the place where we are no longer the walrus. I am you and you are me, but at a physical plane level, we're quite uniquely different because of our wounding. And those are tools in a toolbox that can allow you to do something I can't. And what you don't want to do, like me, one of my rules is never make the same mistake twice. Well, good luck with that, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, but the devil with the blue dress on. I love it. That if you can container, that's what your Cabalian. You asked me, you want to talk about Cabalian. I'm your Huckleberry. I started with Theosophical Society. I went through the whole course with BOTA, Builders of the Adetum. Paul Foster Case was one of my first reads. So before even Aleister Crowley. And so I'm not saying that Paul wrote that, the Cabalian, but they do talk about the three initiates.
They did. I mean, when you look at it, it just,
Yogi Press, that's the primary of Yogi Press. I quote from that back in the 90s That's how long I've been studying these stuff. 80s, 70s. I had right out of the gate. I started in 1969 going to the Theosophical Society on Wednesday nights, Quest Bookstore. Joy Spur, that currently manages that, is a personal friend of mine, and I've actually taught at Rosecroix and in Berlin on Orcas Island. And so I actually got to meet some very cool people, smoke pot with Pir Vilayat Khan on Shaw Island, and then
I love that.
Yeah, with
well, I just want to say something, Rick. You made a prediction last time you were on, and you said at the end of this show, you said, Wayne, the next great frontier for science is going to be magic.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And here we are nearly 6 months later, and I find it, sir, very, how should we say, amusing to see that that is now a term that you read in physics.org. You begin to read in more and more mainstream.
Absolutely.
Magic.
And there's a spelling difference. It's very important to distinguish magic with a C and magic with a K. They're different. That's why Aleister Crowley actually suggested a difference. Now, magic can be like Legerdemain, hand gestures, and sleight of hand. Sleight of mind is more what I'm interested in. When you can, I'm pickpocketing you while you're watching this hand over here.
Sure, yeah.
In your pocket. That's Harry. Harry in your pocket. I think that the new frontiers of physics, high-end physics, is the study of dark matter, black hole, white holes, and the whole nature of altered states of consciousness, and how in these states you can do things that you cannot do in a conscious waking state. And the typical example I've used with you before was when that woman ripped the car door off. That's impossible because of the bone in her body. Her adrenaline did not make her bones stronger. How does that work? It's our mind moving to other universes. And the appendages, the place where the Cabalian and other things like that found root. This was the way of Eastern traditions meeting West. And there was melding with chakras and naughty points, where you're releasing oils and fats and waxes, different parts of your body. There was a blending of that with this. And the best example is Chinese medicine, where they talk about qi and the idea of measuring pulse on your wrist, dealing with this so-called energy that if you poke your right hand, you have a relationship on the left hand. And the problem is Western medicine doesn't have any analogs to that. The nervous system, the circulatory system of the blood, the nerve ganglia, all of that, there's no accounting for that. And that last paper that we did talk on the illusion of reality, where I talk about qi as a microtubule with structured water inside it, that is where the physics now is starting to go very interesting, and is the distinction. You'll notice when they talk about spiritual plane, they're talking about higher levels of information.
Yep.
That's holographic.
Well, you were talking about
holographic back then, but that's concept is holographic, where space and time are no longer the yardstick for measurement, but are illusionary constructs that, what's love got to do with it?
Well, it's like you were saying, it's the first principle of mentalism.
That's correct. Mentalism, and we're not talking about now Mesmer, because mentalism and Mesmer were different at the same time. I have the actual maxims of animal magnetism by Martin Eben. Martin Eben was writing about those and Mesmer back in the early 20s, Idaho. And I graciously got to meet him before he died. And so
that's wonderful.
Well, I've been blessed. I went on a quest, with these questions as a scientist. And that's one of the reasons why the military used me, because I was limber enough not to buy into my own belief systems.
Rick,
I didn't know. I mean, that's where you have to start.
I wonder, with your background, and I've said this, if we started teaching the 7 Hermetic Principles to our young people, and I'm talking about starting at the age of kindergarten, where they become adaptive to the principles as opposed to what we teach them today.
I've got something to tell you now. Here comes the big bomb.
I love this guy.
So you've heard of the Comte Saint-Germain.
Yep.
The bloodlines of Europe, correct?
Yep. Did a whole series on that.
They have approached me to build a metaphysical school in Sedona for children, kind of like Hogwarts.
I think it's about time.
Well, yes. And the Russians are already doing something like this.
Doesn't surprise
me. There's a whole bunch of Russian schools that are mentorship. And they'll bring in 8-year-olds right up to 22, and you go in at your own pace to study organic chemistry.
It's odd that you're saying this, because I released out to the public today an invocation of favor that I've been working on for a while. Anyway, the fact that someone is finally waking up to the fact of being teaching these principles that are in fact the foundation of reality itself, tells me that there's potentially a hope, a light for our species, Rick.
So I don't know how to respond to that other than to say that a child, when it's 2 years old, has a relationship to a sandbox far greater than anything you or I can achieve. And as a gardening, that would be the first principle working with a child would be earth. That's how it starts on the tree of life, Malkuth. There it is. And so the Cabalian is not the Kabbalah.
Correct. I think a lot of people get that mixed up.
And the Cabalian is being used by a lot of metaphysical churches now. Unity Church, others will use that as a foundation for teaching principles. These principles of Cabalian originated with Jane. Is this where you wanted to go? I didn't know.
No, I tell you what, because this is.
So
yeah.
The Appendices had a totally different relationship to the physical world than we currently do today. And it's important to remember that you have 2 brains. One is religion and the other is science, if you want to look at it. And they're actually, in fact, the same thing as a closed system, with Malcolm in the middle somewhere where you're finding your own balance. And why I'm saying it that way is that if you look at the Bible from one perspective, it's a book on physics. And the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, talks about the relationship between sound and words and how the intonations change everything. The entire forms of Mandarin and Cantonese are based on inflection of the word.
Well, that's exactly what Hermes said. That the Egyptian language, the original Egyptian language, they mastered the ability to take sound to a new level, opening up portals.
Well, what I have seen from a physics point of view is I've seen Tibetan Buddhists with these big long horns that are similar to the ones blown in
the Aborigines, isn't it?
Well, I'm talking not the didgeridoo now and the whirs, but these big long horns up in the Himalayas, And when they put them in a certain geometry, I've seen actual large stones lift because of the resonance taking air and making it so vibratory in its movement that it actually can float stones and other things using compression and air. And that is been, and you'll notice that that's how sacred geometry, or what we call cymatics, works with drum physics, where they will, resonate a tone across the bowl, and you have a bowl which is using Bessel functions, and you have a resonant cavity system that when you do the right pronunciations, sacred geometry come out, where you have resonances that set up patterns that are stable. And I'm going to suggest that some of the, what do we see, the crop circles that we'll say are probably a direct form of cymatics happening on an Earth level. The Earth right now is expanding, and actually it is. It's getting a bunch of garbage that is no longer being absorbed by the sun. It's called the solar minimum. When the sun is going through space, it's encountering debris, and it would normally absorb it, and that would cause the sunspots and all the crappy things that are going on. And what's happening is that the sun has gone into a minimum, and as such, now that crap that is running through is hitting the Earth and being absorbed. Neutrinos in Antarctica, for example. That was an article. Okay, there's something else going on here where we have made some assumptions that space and time are real. And well, that's one way of looking at it, just like the Earth is flat.
Sure.
Or there's no such thing as gravity. The Earth sucks. Or you have a whole bunch of groups.
Well, I still, do not understand the principles of gravity itself. I haven't had it adequately explained because I frankly don't think anyone knows.
Well, they don't. It's not like that. Let's try this one. You start in the scientific world, which is different than religious world, with assumed truths and definitions. Let's give one. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Now, if you make that assumption, and that was a valid assumption at one point, then of course the Earth is round and it's circling the sun and da-da-da. However, if I said that that is no longer true and that space is curved with specific simple mathematics, I can prove the Earth's flat. Well, guess what? It's both. Because your assumed truths are what set up the laws of the way of perception of what you're seeing happening. And your upper brain is there to make all your beliefs true. And so you wouldn't have seen it if you hadn't have believed it. However, and the next level of perception is the emotional plane, where you're how you feel about the physical plane.
Sure.
And that's why we call it EQ, not IQ. So and why we worship women, because we don't want to get in a battle.
So have you done the spoon inner perspective experiment? So you just spoke about exactly what this plane is, how we view it, how we experience. What I often thought it was really interesting, you can take a spoon, right? And the interesting thing about this spoon is that one side, I see an inverted universe. The other side, I see it correctly verted. Now, the question is, here we have alchemy at work, is how are we getting a reversed image in a spoon that I can take a knife using the same principle and yet see the same image?
They both exist. You have decided that on this side of the spoon it's going to be this way. On that side of the spoon it's going to be that way.
Well, we're not going to do the Neo interview.
Well, wait a minute. I'm trying to say something. What if I told you that that spoon didn't exist?
Well, now I would believe that. Yeah, this is technically nothing but electrons, molecules.
Well, then there it is. It's a way that you have chosen to define what is real, what is solid, and what is not there.
Now, see, I contend, though, Rick, that what we have the opportunity to see that the universe that we live in is a multiverted universe already.
Well, it's a membrane. It is a
good way of putting it.
It's a membrane, and when you push, it creates a ripple, and it goes back and forth like your two brains, and like the sun and Nibiru, like our galaxy and our white hole on the other side. It is a way of looking at what's going on. Now, what we're talking about, the simple experiment, is a drop of water that hits a pool of water, whip, and it bounces back up. When it bounces back up, by the way, that drop of water is a thought.
Yeah, I love that. Yes.
Okay, like an egregor or whatever. When it bounces back up, it is no longer a drop of water. It is a bubble that has a special kind of water around it, and there's all these different myriad forms of water. It's called exclusion zone water, trapping the medium in which it fell, in this case, air. And if you look inside, it's cavitating into the out of. That's a lovely into.
I love that. Yeah.
As above, so below. That is the hierarchy. That concept is actually holographic, to be distinguished from quantized. And the problem with quantization, taking an analog signal and converting it into a digital form, you run into Heisenberg because of the way you quantize it. The more you know about one thing, the less you know about something else, which means looking at the universe from that point of view has limitations of what you can and what you cannot do. And when you choose a different way of looking at the universe, like there's no such thing as gravity, the earth just sucks.
There just sucks. Well,
I'm just kidding. There's your explanation.
I love that.
Graffiti never hurt anybody.
No. But you bring up some good points, though. I mean, it's the perception on. Well, let's just talk about. You just talked about the same as above, so it's below. Everywhere I see this, I see the 7 Hermetic Principles establishing themselves over and over.
7, you can have 8, you can have 64. Again, the 7 come from nerve ganglia parts in the body, and actually there's 8 of them. And again, that's why the I Ching, the tarot cards, they're all Timothy Leary, might I add. That's why I use 8. I use 8, 7. The reason I use 8 is a way of filing. Is this earth, air, fire, water, spirit? That, I use it as a metaphor in the way I associate one thing with another. That's David Bohm, the implicate order and different similarities and similar differences. How you chunk an automobile. You start with a tire, you go down to the wheel, you have the lug nut, you chunk down, you chunk out in terms of what constitutes a wheel. And as you do that in steps, chakras, your heart chakra,
we know about them here quite well.
Well, that's Eastern. That's Theosophical Society. The Theosophy was where Paul Foster Case and the rest of that crew came from, like Bennett and what's her name, Blavatsky. Ledbetter. Oh man, was he a character? I would have liked to have known him. He was interesting to me. He's like the scientist part of it. He did the secret teachings. That's Stanley Palmer Hall. Excuse me. Ledbetter, and there was Annie Besant. Annie Besant was more Christian, and so she wrote about white magic and black magic. But then Isaac Bonwitz came in and wrote about living color. That was real.
Well, I think at one time, it's my contention that science and spirituality, not religion, spirituality, were at one time coexistent in the same breath.
I think that spirituality is not so much what you do, but how you do it. Now, the quality in which you do whatever it is that you're doing. And science and religion, I think, in my universe, my ways of approaching things, doesn't mean I'm right, is that I see science and religion as the same thing of an hourglass. And what you really have
you
is
think that religion would trump spirituality?
Spirituality is how you get closer to God, not religion.
Well, then how would you define religion?
Are there mostly to find fellowship, to reinforce a given belief system. Everybody's got a different belief system. And what you want to do is get validation or reinforcement of helping you hold that line of between ethics and morals. And morals are what you absolutely ascribe to. Ethics are logic parts, but you don't necessarily do it. Ducky Mallard said, an ethical man knows not to cheat on his wife. A moral man won't. Now,
but I also go by the old adage too that I've seen bad men do good things, and I've seen very good men do very bad things.
Yes, and you did the right thing for the wrong reason, or the wrong thing for the right reason.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so I think that, maybe the problem, I think where I'm viewpointing this is that I see spirit and mind as entities that are within a body. And I have, in my theology, I have no room for religion.
Yes, I appreciate where you're going with that. I live in a community that's mostly churches, almost every street.
I know your hell.
Well, Christianity, there's other things. Unity Church.
I know. You have to have a little jovial spirit. Joy does the heart as a good medicine.
What I'm doing now is I like to go to different churches each Sunday and Saturday and or Wednesdays, Thursdays. Sometimes depends on which church is doing what, to get a measure of fellowship. Now that's what a group, in meditation, they made a distinction between individual meditation and group meditation, Hinayana and Minayana yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And churches are the same thing. The reason that one would normally go to a certain church over another one is that church had values, ethics that you ascribed to more and wanted to make yourself more moral in that regard. And you surround yourself with lots of other baseball players wanting to play baseball on a Saturday afternoon, church picnic. And that's what a church is about. It's a fellowship to reinforce your certain values. And so I go to different churches to see what lessons are being used. Rather than learn, I study them. And that means I integrate a given teaching on James and what he did with Christ, and try to integrate that into my own belief systems. And it's my guess that there are probably as many different religions as there are human beings, that each one of us is uniquely different in just subtle ways, and that we group each other in certain ways. Notice the hardest part is why you go to that church, like Christians not making judgment, for example, or a Jain not hurting anything but sweeping ants out of their way, life forms and not harming another. The Essene Gospels are what I think are the foundation of
I'm an ordained minister, right?
What's that, sir?
I was an ordained minister, right?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
which I'm ordained too, but that metaphysical church.
No. This was actually, I came out of what they would call the Word of Faith part of it, the charismatic movement that led to speaking in tongues and laying hands.
Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Yes, I know that. I don't know that way. I know that way. I know.
See, I built the first mobile giving app for churches back in 2010.
My gosh, what am I doing here? I'm dead now.
I worked with Joyce Myers when she was just starting out.
Prismatics.
I know.
Prismatics are like Elmer Gantry. That's what I want to do. I want to have the wrath of God and bring the rain down.
Well, now you think about this. You got people like Kenneth Copeland. You've got people like Paula White. Paula White is the spiritual guidance or guide to President Trump. Did you know that?
No, and I can only guess where that could go.
Well, listen, so when you start talking about this and you're talking about the area of how I see religion, that's something I know a whole lot about. That's why I left the religion, is that because it could not, as I tell people, if it had to do a background check, it would fail.
I have posted this last week a guy I think he's from the Philippines, that nails where Satanism started with the New World Order and the constructs of this new movement of devil worshiping. And the reason I am interested in this kind of thing is that when we find books like the Yazidis, the tribes up in the northern part of Iraq, they were pre-Christian devil worshiping cults. What would that suggest to you? And we knew about that kind of thing back in the 70s, where we were dealing with demons coming out of doors. That's what led to the Stargate. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Joseph Isaiah from the Vatican. He was a Jesuit. The Jesuits are a real nasty bunch when you really start to study.
Did a whole thing on them.
Well, with Weishaupt and the rest of it.
Yeah.
I belong to lodges. I have been exposed to some of that. I can tell you some interesting things that people don't know that I do. For example, the Mass of the Holy Ghost, sex magic from Kundalini, basically is, in metaphor, is the thought that occurs at the moment of climax happens. And what I did as a scientist, I did a study, a biochemical study on menstruum and semen when they mix with each other. And what happens is a very rare protein that's formed that when consumed as a Eucharist is a form of immortality. And the so-called drinking of baby's blood, a child, not an adult, but a child, releases a different kind of adrenaline into the blood that is like crack cocaine. And people don't even know that, but there's whole cults out there now based on that kind of crap. And the drug experience itself is to heighten or open doors into these altered states. But it was John Curtis Gowan that started talking about the ontologies of mystical states, hierarchy of it. And that's where I was interested in, where you had the prototaxic, parataxic, and syntactic modes of consciousness. He was at Northridge. He wrote another book called The Development of the Psychedelic Individual. It had nothing to do with drugs. He was a social anthropologist. He hasn't gotten Nobel Prizes, but he's gotten similar awards for his works in that area. And prototaxic modes would be like a shaman that can place its consciousness in an eagle and see what the eagle sees. That's a very low level of consciousness. Then the parataxic modes deal with dream states, archetypes, and metaphor, the quasi place where you can't quite know what's going on. Like a dream isn't really about things, it's about how you felt about it. There's an emotional thing, and that's a quasi place. And then we aspire towards syntactic modes of consciousness. Now, this is the area I was right out of that sex magic, where you're creating an egregor, or you're a thought form, a group thought form that goes from psyche directly into matter, becomes real. How do you do that? And I've studied biofeedback, where I learned how to control autonomic functions. That was 45 years ago. It saved my life. Now what I'm studying is the release of specific neurotransmitters with conscious invocation in my mind's eye. That's the good way of putting it, the mind's eye. If you can envision the release of some of these things, it turns out you can actually release specific neurotransmitters. They do then put you in altered states, and with control, I can have in one brief moment the strength of 10 like an ant. I can do that. I can do that consciously. I can do other things because other states of consciousness, and there's an ontology of them, his abilities in guessing, that kind of thing. That's where I think our sciences are going now, in those studies where in this state, this person is in a different universe with different laws.
Well, and that kind of goes with, again, the 7 principles. I mean, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. Gender not being male or female is what people think it is. But I find it so interesting when we begin to look on this on comparative studies that, you know, you take it on a different approach, but it's actually all on the same approach that we're looking at this. It's really kind of preparing for the eventual departure of these bodies into that next plane of existence.
Well, this body isn't really physically real, and there is past and future lives available to you through hypnosis and other altered states, dream states, channeling. It all has different layers. That's what John Curtis Gowan did. He did the ontology of which one is, in terms of where it belongs in the scale.
But see, I contend we're already doing that now, Rick. I mean, as I told, I talking to my wife, I was meditating on this afternoon as I was cooking. I was thinking about the 25-year-old R. Wayne Steiger, and the consciousness hit me that at 63, me going back and talking to a different life, 25-year-old. And Lynn looked at me, she says, and well, what happened? I said, you know what? I dug the cat, still do. And my point is that we fail to understand that we're actually living multiple lives in this timeline. We just won't become conscious of it because it's a day-by-day process that we become immune to. And that's just my contention.
Well, you filter it out of consciousness doesn't mean it isn't in the subconscious.
Or the superconscious.
Yeah. Well, that's more of a Sigmund Freud. And I've now moved more toward Carl Jung. In fact, I'm not even into Jungian so much as I am imaginal psychology and James Hillman. I find that a very useful way of approaching problems in physics using imaginal psychology. That means that psychology, for example, is no longer soft. It's becoming a hard science where there's interesting, somebody this morning, and I sent you that just as a backup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some on ibogaine.
Yeah.
Somebody wanted to know how ibogaine stops all forms of addiction, opiate addiction and things like that, in one single use. That is now being studied in 11 universities. And the point I made in that I'd like to emphasize here is the distinction between a habit and an addiction. What's the difference? And once you change your definition of the one to the other, now you can understand how these new drugs of hallucinations are leading toward, and I think I've done this one before, this book here, becoming our new medicine.
Yeah, talking about psilocybin particularly.
But that one's specific, but
yeah,
they all are doing something different than we understand in terms of site receptors, like opiate site receptors of dopamine and so on. In fact, what we're now starting to talk about is your boot up in the morning. You know, when you get out of bed, you have a ritual that you conduct, even though you're not conscious of it, when you go to the toilet and you flush the toilet and you immediately grab your toothbrush to put the toothpaste on before the water clears. You play these little games with yourself. It is those games that define your behavior and attitude for that day. And just changing those is your auto exec bat and config sys files and the way you boot up. I watched them take a 14-year IV user, heroin, off of Amsterdam Park, and in a 30-hour clinical intake, the end of 30 hours, the guy went through a bunch of nightmares. It's terrible. Near death, all of it. At the end of the day, 30 hours later, he will never, ever use heroin again. He, when he lights up to smoke a cigarette, to talk about it, he doesn't smoke anymore. And he had no withdrawals.
I don't know. When I hear this, I filter it out as just another form of mind control.
It is a type of what it is. It's PGO waves in the occipital region. In other words, there's other things going on than what we defined 45 years ago with biofeedback, alpha states, theta, and so on. There's other things going on in the way the brain resonates itself, right to left hemisphere. Okay, these are like the alpha wave. It isn't like he's alpha, and then a wave comes through like that. These are called P300 waves, and they're measured with what is these big imaging machines now. They're
like an MIR,
functional MRI. Functional MRIs are used to map cross sections in the brain.
So can we talk back on the psychotropics though? We were talking about the psilocybin and how it has this ability. I know they're treating now PSD, post-traumatic stress syndromes with it. I'm curious though if there have been studies on whether, I was in experiments back in 1970, 71 with LSD, was with a control group. But the point is that in my experimentation, it was not only psilocybin, it was mescaline, it was peyote, and the different psychotropics that I was exposed to. Now they're finding, as you were just saying, how they basically attach to the receptors and can alter a person's complete dynamics.
Well, first, most psychedelics are toxins.
Oh, yeah.
And are similar look-alike chemistries to your own neurotransmitters. They're not the same. Like lysergic acid diethylamide is not.
It's a totally different trip than peyote, I can tell you. In fact, I found peyote, Rick, to be much more spiritual.
It's opening different sites of the brain. And that's just like ayahuasca, methyltryptamine. They're all different, and they do different things, and that's why Leary made a distinction in neurologic circuits. His work in that area, I think, is genius, and you'll find that in my workbook 1, where I run down the distinctions of the different neurotransmitters as hierarchies, going from physical to emotional and so on. And you start with alcohol, moving up into,
I'm never a big fan of alcohol, those type of spirits, Rick,
it goes downhill from there, and then further down, I'm not even going to tell you, and pleasure, scratching my back. It's all chemistry. And
it's chemistry. You think about reality, it's predicated on 2 electrical stimuli and 3 chemical.
Probably when you take lysergic acid diethylamide, the body freaks out. And what it does is it overproduces a massive quantity of lysergic acid amide. And the lysergic acid diethylamide, the LSD you took, that's broken down in salts and in the urine probably within 20 minutes of ingestion. And the next 20 hours of hallucinations are from your own body chemistry. It's homeopathic.
Oh, I can tell you.
Those
Ah.
are the studies now that are starting to find interesting possibilities of how you might use that as a tool. Now, that means that if I take a glass of water and I take a single drop of something, I don't care what it is, it changes the entire jug of water, the container. And that's called homeopathy. That's Rustum Roy's work at Penn State. It restructures the water in the whole vessel, because when water touches something, it sets up a memory of what it is and a single item in there. So imagine you got a fullerene ball, you put a single drop of water inside it where it's being touched on every single orifice of itself, water. That fullerene with carbon now becomes an incredible antioxidant. I mean, one that will even reduce radiation sickness. I mean, it'll go in and isolate the bad ion.
Well, I can tell you, when I was in this control group, our handler, they introduced us to a whole lot of different. They taught us transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
We were in the sensory vats. That was a weird experiment. Being tripped out. We were getting about 500 mics of pure LSD, and I will say this: our intelligence increased. Every one of the participants, they gave us IQ test going in and going out. It did increase that much more.
This is not to advocate the.
No.
Yeah.
I was a part of a controlled group.
There are shortcuts to Grandma's house.
Well, sometimes you meet the big bad wolf too on the way.
Well, there it is. That's what I'm trying to suggest. All shortcuts have their edges. And to take a drug like ayahuasca to jumpstart your own production, which is the chill going up your body, that's chill. You can read about that with Gopai Krishna or Sri Aurobindo. They talk about the ascending Kundalini. What that is, by the way, literally, is little cilia stick out on the central nervous system and set up a standing wave going up or down the body in a specific bandwidth called visible light region. It's visible light. It's in the light band, very narrow band of light going up and down your spine. And your pineal gland at the base of the spine up here at the very top at the inion, that is light sensitive. It was primarily part of regulating the body to seasonal changes.
That's interesting.
It was a light sensitive body, and but it has subsequently, because of artificial lights and what we do, calcified, hardly used. But if you practice Kundalini, you can reopen that. Now, what that does is one thing it does. I've just one of myriad possible doers is it sets up a standing wave in the neural cavity. And now, instead of generating glial cell, you can generate true nerve tissue. And that's Robert O. Becker's studies. And that means you can have, using Kundalini, a way of regenerating nerve tissue if you have palsy or you're getting old. Most everybody stops generating true nerve tissue at around 30. And
well, did you hear in the UK, they found the first 26-year-old with dementia. 26 years old, Rick. I mean,
well, Dorito corn chips.
I don't know what it is. And, when I look back at my past, I went through that phase. By the time 1972 had come around, that was already something I had experienced. I'd gotten everything I wanted out of that. And today I can do that. I can get to those same states of consciousness by meditating.
You do that with fundamentalism also, and yoda. Talk yourself into a blather, and you can go there, oh yeah. And that is a release of specific neurotransmitters. Now you're accentuating that you're you're over amplifying it, trying to get these releases. Wouldn't it be neat if you could play your brain like you would a flute?
I prefer a bassoon, but I'll take a flute.
Well, that is the next stage in the evolution of man, to be able to use altered states of consciousness as tools in a toolbox to achieve purpose.
Yeah. And listen, I happen to be a person that believes that every shaman, every medicine man, every healer, that there are those elements, herbs specifically, that are designed to release certain specific healing.
Assisting you in jump starting. You can do it on your own like meditation, or you can use brain drivers as a shortcut to grandma's house.
Yeah, I can lay hands on people, Rick, and I have a gift, particularly where heads are concerned, energies like injuries, that, you know,
you're an empath. I got it. That everybody has that.
Yeah, they do.
Your belief that you can do it is what gives you the psyche into the matter of making it so. Yeah. And others that, I really can't do this. And then because they believe they can't, they can't.
Well, that's why you worked with the CIA. I mean, that and with the Navy. I mean, that's what you were working with, building that ability, right?
To build super soldiers by enhancements using high-end technology to get there quicker.
I bet your research is still playing out today.
To get a brain like that.
Yeah.
You know, it takes Persinger, others have done studies, and they've looked at the brain of somebody that's meditated for 30 years, and it's different than most people.
Yeah.
I have that brain. I got that brain in less than 4 years using brain drivers. Now, like biofeedback,
I love that term, brain drivers. That's a cool term. What brain I like drivers? That. I like that.
I've got a kit.
Have you had your brain driver today? If not, I love it.
Really. Actually, I have used some tools I'm starting to share so that you have shortcuts like meditation. Yeah. To have the brain of a meditator of 30 years means that you're in a bliss state. The Upanishads talked about 8 levels of bliss. They are called the cosmic consciousness. What are they? I forget the word that's used in Theosophical Society. They're jhana states, Jhanta, jhanta, cosmic consciousness, different levels of it. When you get to those stages, then you go into a whole new level of relationship to things like love. For example, the love of will, talama, is your purpose. But when you get into a bliss state, now you can become inflamed. That means you are consumed with what you're doing because it's closer to purpose. That is a type of love that is associated with bliss and what the Quaker will call joy. And joy, I'm trying to, use words to give a concept of this concept of when you're in the trap 4x4, everything is it's just happening. That is purpose, where none shall say nay. And that place is a type of love that is described in the old texts and ancient texts, and Theosophy, we'll talk about it, as the jhana states, or cosmic consciousness is what Timothy Leary called it. I remember in Leary's Varieties of Psychedelic Experience, when he wrote that with Metzger and what's his face, I remember he said the Buddhists had 4 reasons for getting high, and only one of them was for escape and recreation. There were 3 other reasons the Buddhists used these highs for spiritual growth and advancement. And it is through these doors, doing it on your own, not taking an outside drug. The drug, again, is a shortcut. What it does essentially is jumpstart your brain's own production of these neurotransmitters. The primary one that we talked about, psychedelic, was lysergic acid iamide. That drug or neurotransmitter is the one associated with aha, when you connect one dot with another. And when you
Does
see
have
the
a few of
connection,
those.
you see, oh, and you, wow, that is what that drug is. And imagine being able to do that at will.
I can tell you an experience I had, true to life. Actually, I was on Orange Sunshine.
Oh, geez.
And
I made that with Bill Hosley. That was the one I made. And
so
it was Orange Barrel. And
that was about 200. It was about 210 mics. And true story. We had a greenhouse in the Montrose area where I was living at. And I went out and preached to the plants in that greenhouse. And the thing about it is that they were alive. They were digging what I was preaching.
Oh, of course they were. How could they not?
I still remember to this day the pansies literally clapping their hands. I still remember.
You know, that's the Red Queen and dancing through the tulips. There it is in Alice in Wonderland.
I mean, true, folks. Every word of it, absolutely true. Experienced it, and man, I was I didn't peak on that for about 10 hours. I mean, it was just intense. But anyway,
I have been there, done that, know that song. Then there's the other side where you're looking down. I remember Timothy Leary. I was on. I was looking down at Deception Path, 2,000 feet straight down into Hurricane Ridge. I was up at Hurricane Ridge, north end of Washington State, and I'm blown. And water's peeling back colors. And Larry leans over and he says, "Wouldn't it be neat to jump?"
All you have to do is just.
I got that, man. Yeah, there's your doors of perception, man. Watch them slam shut.
Oh my goodness!
Don't want to hear that. You want to go there. Did you ever go internal with that? Because what I did at that moment, and that's the reason this moment is all about altered states of consciousness in physics.
Yeah.
Physicist, I wanted to know. I discovered at that moment how vast inner space is, the constructs of imagination.
Oh, it's vast. It's vast. Sorry, something in my eye. I can remember I was so far gone, Rick, at one point I had left my body, and my body, they actually had to call the paramedics, and because I was gone. What I call the Gatekeeper, I had met them 3 different times, and the third time they gave me permission to cross over. And
you had a choice.
I did. And I remember taking the step, and it was very odd. I still can't tell you a form, but it was a presence who simply sat down. I was sitting on a park bench of all places, telling me that this was not the right decision. And I came. Yeah. So anyway,
you had more things to do. You had to talk.
Well, I was going to have to talk with you. I mean, Now I know you have some things going on. You got some books. You have an event happening in your part of the country in Oregon, right?
Grants Pass, yeah.
Tell everyone about that.
That's going to be the ESP induction course. I teach people how to think with their gut rather than using their mind. Be instinctive, to work from intuition. And that's how I chose SEAL Team 1. What I'll do is I measure your ESP at the beginning of the day, in the morning, take a baseline on you. And then I talk about mission control with Edgar Mitchell and the studies I did with him, and the debriefing with Milan Riesel, Czechoslovakian. And then I develop some equations on consciousness, and then talk about what hypnosis is and how to use it as a tool. There is an altered state. I'm going to try to do this right with you. That this is you right here, but the altered state right here next to you, not where you are, right over here, that place you can guess 400 times better than where you are in conscious waking state. And then at the end of the day, I measure you again.
I love this. Now, when is this? When is the date?
That'll be next Sunday on the 14th. And
All right.
It starts at 8 in the morning. The Riverside Inn is right there on the Rogue River. The winter rates have gone in. I have the Evergreen Room, which is right on the road. It's incredible. They're going to serve lunch at Tap Rock. You can see it's a big 3-story log home.
Here you go. Right here. Rick,
oh, yeah. That's it right there. That's on the Rogue River. And on either side, that's 6th and 7th Street on either side. On either side are hotels that you can check in with group rates, and it's a full day workshop. And the second thing are my audiobooks. You know, I showed you that as well. The audiobooks there that are on sale now. I have 10 of them. And with the download library that I've offered you, I have, these are audiobooks. I know those are, what you want is to go to shop, Richard Allen Miller shop. Yeah, go up on the top.
All right.
Go back and go to library and shop right here. Yeah, go to library up here and shop. Library and shop up higher.
There we go.
There it is right there. Just click that. Now you have your audiobooks. There's the brain drivers that just started. If you scroll down, okay. I have metaphysics 1 through 10. Each one of these is 8 weeks of courses. That means there's 8 weeks times 10 years there, with all the downloaded libraries of rare manuscripts that are on this as well. There's like, and on one of them, there's over 1 gigabyte of information.
Wow.
I'm using, when I taught metaphysics at Harvard, I used references, and what I'm doing is offering those with the classes that I taught. Now, back then, we didn't have video and MP3s. What we had was log notes, and so I've assigned it to
Mimeograph machines, folks. Mimeograph.
yeah. Xerox as opposed to printer.
Exactly.
Yeah. But what I'm doing is I'm offering the books that I use, so you can do your own study, come to your own conclusions, not mine.
I love this, folks. You know, this is a man that has, you know, I have said before, and I'll say it again, is one of the great minds of our time. And by the way, Rick, I've left all the links in the description point as well, that they can easily get there. I think as well, folks, if you have the opportunity to come out and spend the day, I think this would be a workshop well worth the time.
Well, you get 8 hours of me.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, Terry Cassidy, originally Vegas that came in from out of the cold. There's my audiobooks there. That's the newest thing. The 3 books that I'm going to be coming out with before Christmas there's 3 books. There's one on herb farming with farm plans for all different parts of North America. The second one is called The Magical and Ritual Use of Metaphor, Archetypal Gods in Daily Living. There's 22 chapters.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. And then the third one is The Non-Local Mind in a Holographic Concept, in a holographic universe. And how to change the movie. And I am dealing with how to change movies, like with pathworking. That is what pathworking. And basically the contention is, in imaginal psychology, you're either possessed or you're complex. Now, possessed means
I love that.
and complex means you have more than one story going on. And what you're trying to do is identify what that story is, because it has an ending. And is that how you want it to end? And if you don't want it to end that way, you change the movie. And that's called pathworking. And that's my take on how we're going to do magic down home style.
I love this.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, Rick. Wow. Thank you hours go by. It tells me that time is relative to where your mind is at.
That's the distinction between the profane and the sacred, where something that you're doing becomes timeless. When you get caught up, that's where the magic really occurs.
I love this. Well, Rick, thank you again. What an exciting hour. Will you come back on?
Anytime you'd like me, Wayne. I enjoy talking about this kind of subject, and especially with people like you. Yes.
Well, you honor me. And listen, people sometimes when they hear our stories, Rick, they'll think we're crazy.
If you want, what you can do, if you have a gallery of people with questions that are diverse, I'm your huckleberry. That's what
Hey, folks, take advantage of that. If I don't have his email, it's on his website. Ask him the questions. That's how I learned. When I got introduced to this man, I said, okay.
My models and ways of looking at things are semi-limited, so I've tried to broaden my worldviews with different studies. And that's what I've tried to do, because the broader your worldview, the more access that you have to the world. That's why I've said before, a Buddhist can be a Christian, but a Christian can't be a Buddhist. And it's because a Buddhist has a broader worldview. And that means a Buddhist can do more in terms of physical pain. It's a metaphor in terms of how your beliefs allow you to access certain universes and limit others.
Boy, I'll tell you what, when I finally got to that place where I realized, and for me, and specifically in the Cabalian, where the all is the all. And now, a person can be any religion they want. It's fine, because in the end, it's still the all.
How did Batman put it? It's not who you are, but what you do that defines who you are. And
long live Adam West.
Spirituality then is not what you do, but how you do it.
Yeah.
The quality in which you go about your personal pursuit.
There we go.
That's what spirituality is.
Well, folks, get over there. Listen, take advantage of this man's book. I'll tell you, great minds, it's how you expand your mind. And that's the only way that we grow. Dr. Miller, it is always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Yes, sir.
Thank you, everyone in there, all the moderators. Rick, we've had a full house all night long.
Cool.
So are you going to be coming up on
Friday night glimpse?
Are you going to be up on any more interviews anywhere?
Nothing coming up yet at this point. I just take them as they fly in. And what I do now is I'm putting together a small group of wildcrafters so they can work in the woods and attend limited sources of income working in the woods. We're going to try to see if that works. We're going to network it around the country.
Folks, I'm telling you, Rick, this has been my contention. We have within us the abilities, the ideas, and the talents, and even the resources to make everyone here self-sufficient.
Yes.
I didn't say rich. Prospering, yes. And I think to be self-sufficient is to be the most prosperous of all.
Well, empowerment. That's why you want to teach children basics in an early age, like how to grow their own food, how to test their own water. Once a child has been empowered, watch what happens next.
Yeah. Rick, you're a brilliant mind. It is an honor and a pleasure to be able to call you friend.
Thank you. Yeah, my too.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, folks, have a great weekend. We'll see you on Sunday over on Jeff Doherty's channel, and you're not your normal Sunday morning. And until then, be good. Love yourself. You'll learn to love others after that. Rick, thank you, my friend.
You bet.